Hello to all my wonderful constituents in Maryland's 8th Congressional District and our friends beyond. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin coming at you this Thursday evening, November the 12th. And I'm having a little Facebook event because I want to first state the obvious, which is that Joe Biden has won the presidential election. He has been declared the winner in enough states to give him 279 electors. You only need 270 in order to have a majority in the Electoral College. So he is going to be the new president, and he is the president-elect. He's also ahead in both Georgia and Arizona, and assuming that those results are certified, he will end up with 306 Electoral College votes. So he has both a robust majority in the popular vote, having won more than 5 million votes more than President Trump, and also a robust majority in the Electoral College. But I decided to come at you guys tonight because I've received a deluge of comments from constituents by email, by text, by phone, and even people approaching me when they see me outside, because people are very concerned that President Trump will be some way to nullify the results of the election and deny the President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris their rightful places as the leaders of the executive branch of government. And so I wanted a series of different questions I got to answer them the best that I can. And this is not in any way to dismiss or trivialize people's concerns, because I share those concerns. But I want to tell you that we in the House of Representatives are doing everything in our power to make certain that there will be no coup of any type against the popular vote majority, against the Electoral College majority, which have been assembled by Joe Biden and by Kamala Harris. And there are teams of lawyers with the Biden campaign in every state. There are state attorneys general. There are lawyers here in Washington. It's not only in the House, but also in the Senate, that are doing everything in our power to guarantee that there's a peaceful transfer of power and that the constitutional processes are respected. And so let me go through some specific concerns the best that I can. And I want to thank members of my staff, Josie Farron and Kathleen Connor and Samantha, through a whole bunch of these and assembling them into groups. One is the fear that President Trump will declare the election results fraudulent. He can say whatever he wants. We've got a First Amendment in America, but his declaring the results fraudulent is completely meaningless. And it's no more relevant than some deranged person approaching you on the street and saying that the election doesn't count. He's not in charge of declaring the results of the election. That is in the hands of state secretaries of state and state boards of election, and there's a whole process in place within every state to determine winner is. And then after that, there's a process in the Electoral College, which I will explain. And after that, there is a process coming to Congress in joint session on January the 6th. The president literally has nothing to do with it. So that is all sound and fury and much ado about nothing. Also, people have said Trump will never concede the election. And you're probably right about that. But you know what? It makes no difference at all. He doesn't need to concede. There is no provision in the US Constitution. There is no provision in any state's election law that requires the president to concede in order for the state's electors to be granted to the popular vote victor in the state. So all of that, again, is going to take place completely apart from whatever Donald Trump and his supporters say. That's just irrelevant. Okay, now we're getting closer to things that we've got to explain in more detail. It's that what are we going to do when the Republicans try to manipulate the Electoral College? Now, this is a serious concern. This has been my major concern from the beginning, that the president and his team would try to thwart a clear popular election, vote selection in a state for the Democrats. So take Pennsylvania, for example, which is a critical state here. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have won the state of Pennsylvania by a better than 50,000 vote margin, which is a huge margin. There's never been a turnaround in a presidential election with a margin like that. That's a huge number of votes. Okay. Well, let's say that Donald Trump tries to convince the Republican-controlled legislature of Pennsylvania to discredit and dishonor the popular vote victory for Joe Biden, nullify the popular vote election, over and repeal the Pennsylvania state election statute, and then meet in extraordinary session in order to adopt a new statute organized whereby the Pennsylvania legislature would just appoint electors for Donald Trump, or split the electors 50-50, or engage in some other kind of against. There are multiple problems that make this nearly impossible, if not completely impossible. Begin with this. The state Senate majority leader in Pennsylvania, the Republican majority leader, has already stated repeatedly that this would not happen, that the Pennsylvania state legislature would not nullify the popular election result and try to substitute a slate of Trump electors. So much to his credit, he has said, the state legislature has already developed an election process. It has an electoral college mechanism for distribution of those electors, and it is working just fine. And so we are not going to touch it. That's number one. Number two, if somehow the president and all the president's men were to convince the leaders of the Republican legislature to change their minds about this, they would have to be called into an extraordinary session. And not only would they have to convince all of the members against all of the evidence that there was some kind of fraud or corruption that had taken place in order to engage in this remarkable and breathtaking act of legislative corruption, but then they would have to get the governor of the state to sign it. Because remember, the election statute that they would be purporting to nullify and repeal was one that was adopted in accordance with the Pennsylvania state constitution. And so they would also need to repeal it by way of the Pennsylvania state constitution, and they would have to replace it and substitute a new statute by way of the Pennsylvania Constitution, which means they would have to get the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania to go along with this extraordinary and absurd plan. That's simply not going to happen. But imagine that all of that somehow happened, and then they were the legislature, or say the legislature separately just sent this in to Congress. Well, according to the 20th Amendment of the Constitution, members of Congress are sworn in. So we're going to be sworn in as a new Congress on January the 3rd, the House and the Senate. On January 6th, under the terms of the 20th Amendment, the Electoral College certifications are sent in by each state to this joint session of Congress, which is presided over by the president of the Senate, who is Vice President Mike Pence. So say, again, assuming the worst about everything, that Vice President Pence is reading down the list of states as is called for by the 12th Amendment, okay? So all of the states would have to be read in alphabetical order. That's Alabama through Wyoming. Say they get to Pennsylvania, and Vice President says, okay, we have two rival slates that have been sent in. One by the governor and the Secretary of State certifying electors for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But there's also this other one that has come in from the legislature, which is certifying electors for Donald Trump. And I, Mike Pence, believe that the Trump electors are the correct electors, and I will certify those. At that point, the House of Representatives, I can guarantee you, will object to the validation of that electoral college slate. And all we need is one senator, dozens of senators who join us, some will join us. But regardless of whether or not the Senate is in the hands of Democrats or Republicans on that day, we will have senators, the requisite number of senators, to join with us to object. At that point, under the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the House and the Senate will resolve to our separate chambers in order to consider the objection. Undoubtedly, the House of Representatives would say this is a fraudulent slate coming from Pennsylvania that the vice president likes and sustain the objection. If the Senate is in the hands of Democrats, it also is overwhelmingly likely to sustain that objection. If the House and Senate agree that this objection is valid, at that point, the objection works and that phony electoral college slate would be rejected. Now, what if the Senate is in the hands of the Republicans? At that point, there's a disagreement between the House and the Senate. Under the terms of the Electoral Count Act of 1887, at that controlling factor, what is determinative is the so-called certificate of ascertainment that is issued by the governor of the state, by the chief executive of the state. At that point, then, presumably, the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania's certificate would be accepted by the joint session of Congress in the event of a disagreement between the House and the Senate. The whole point of the Electoral Count Act of 1887 passed in the wake of the controverted election of 1876, where there really was a lot of mystery about where the states were and lots of rival slates and so on. The whole point of that statute is to resolve any potential deadlock between the House and the Senate by referring it to the decision, the certificate of ascertainment of the chief executive of the state. And in that case, you would have a Democratic governor and not going along with this fraud on the public. The same thing would happen in North Carolina. The same thing would happen in Michigan, again, where there's a Republican-controlled legislature, but Governor Whitmer is a Democrat. And so we simply don't see the arithmetic being there, even if you could get over all of the other political, state constitutional, juridical, and legislative obstacles to get it to that point. Obviously, the Republicans would love, as President Trump is saying, somehow to deny Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, his majority in the Electoral College. We don't see any way we can do it. Now, another person asked the question, well, could they just go to the Supreme Court? It's not up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has no formal part in this process. But you say, what about Bush versus Gore, Florida in 2000? Great question. But look what happened in 2000. Remember, the Electoral College votes had already been allocated. In essence, the votes had been decided in all other 49 states. It all came down to Florida, which was a razor-close election, nearly tied. George W. Bush was just a few hundred votes ahead, and that's what gave the opportunity to a GOP majority on the Supreme Court to intervene, and on completely fraudulent pretenses, I think, to stop the counting of ballots there. But in this case, although the president and his men have brought legal challenges in multiple states around the country, all of them are completely baseless and meritless. There's nothing there. The most promising one that I've seen comes from Pennsylvania, about the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision to allow ballots to be that were validly cast before Election Day to be received and accepted up to 3 days after Election Day because of all the problems in the post office and because of COVID-19. And there is a claim that this is at odds with the plain text of the state constitution and the statute that was adopted by the Pennsylvania legislature. Okay, that's their very best argument in the whole country. Even if that were, it would apply only to several hundred votes, at most 500 or 600 votes. And remember that Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, has already 50,000 more votes in Pennsylvania than they do. And that's their best argument. Everything else is just completely phony, trumped up stuff. You hear them say one thing on TV where they talk a really tough game, but you look at what the lawyers actually file in court, and there's nothing there because, of course, they can be sanctioned for lying to the court. This has been, despite all of the provocations and antics by Donald Trump and the Republicans, this has been an extremely smooth election where both Democratic and Republican state elections officials have done a very fine job, and we should not be undermining them and questioning them in this ridiculous way. So I don't think they could get even one case up to the Supreme Court that has any merit at all, much less 3 or 4 cases from enough states to overturn the results to make a difference. And by the way, the vast majority of the American people are standing by this election and understand that it has been validly counted, and that President-elect Joe Biden has won it fair and square. That's what the people understand, despite all of the propaganda on Fox News, which again is just sound and fury. It's just background noise to the perfectly valid legal process that has been taking place. Okay, let me just see if I can address a couple more. The suggestion is, well, maybe there will be electors. There will be electors who flip over. Here, you got nothing to worry about at all. Why do I say that? Number one, people think that there are just electors for the state and they're told to vote for Biden or they're told to vote for Trump. That's not how it works. Separate slates. There was one slate that was chosen, vetted by Donald Trump, people he could trust and believe in, and one that was vetted and developed by Joe Biden for every particular state. So we've got our electors in Maryland who went through a complex vetting process through the state party, through the Biden campaign, and they've been settled on. So to say that there will be faithless electors is to say that you've got true blue Democrats who've been chosen to go and vote for Joe Biden if Biden wins in the state, and that somehow they would have a last-minute change of heart and go in Donald Trump after 4 years of this nightmare. I don't think that's going to happen. Don't worry about it. In the entire history of the United States, there have been fewer than 100 faithless electors, and that includes a lot of elections where people were just generally chosen as electors, but that's not the way that it's working, and that's not the way that it's happening now. So I wouldn't worry about that. Other people are writing in about Trump trying to sabotage the transition process. Here, we've got serious worries. We know that Emily Murphy is the GSA official who has essentially refused to turn the keys over for the purposes of transition so that the Biden team can get the money, can get the offices that are their legal due and that are part of the contemplation of the peaceful transfer of power, which is in cranny of our Constitution and our law. Like this, it is just breathtaking and outrageous what they are doing. The president's refusal to acknowledge reality is a reflection of his own derangement. The fact that you have so many people going with him is a pretty terrifying statement about the politics within the Republican Party now. But there are lots of Republicans, including elections officials, who are doing their job, who don't like all of the heckling and the completely baseless attacks on the electoral process. The Biden-Harris transition teams have been working around the Trump administration to collect resumes, to figure out who people are going to be at different levels of the government. And they are working to figure out all of the situations with foreign governments. And they are working to try to figure out what they will need to do in order to really hit the ground running. But the Trump people are making it extremely difficult. This is a serious problem. But again, it doesn't go to the reality that under the 20th Amendment on January 20th, Donald Trump is going to be gone and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be taking office. Now, other people have written in about the problem that I know is giving a lot of people nightmares, which is how do you physically get rid of someone who refuses to move? And I would say that really is the least of our worries here. That's what police or Secret Service is for. That's what U.S. Marshals are for. We have the President of the United States has a lot of security personnel at his disposal, and I have no doubt that the incoming Biden administration will be able to deal with that if there is a squatter in the White House or somewhere else. And I do think that there are enough people who are grounded in reality in the Republican Party that they would be able to get to Donald Trump to say, you really do have to go. We know that he's worried about a whole bunch of things, from personal bankruptcy to being prosecuted for a whole range of white-collar offenses and other kinds of crimes in New York. And he's worried about facing those things. And all I can say about that is that we have a system of laws in America. We have the rule of law in America. The president will be protected by the Constitution. He will have the right to lawyers if he's prosecuted for anything, but he does not have a right to derail the constitutional processes of government because he's afraid of what is going to take place in terms of either $400 million in debt that he owes some unnamed people abroad or at home, or just because he's afraid of going into bankruptcy again, which we know he's done numerous times before, or because he's afraid of criminal prosecution. That doesn't give him a right to be a squatter office. So that will not be allowed. There's a fear that the president will issue new regulations and executive orders that will continue to do long-term harm to the government. And all I can say about that is we will do everything in our power to stop lawless orders, unconstitutional orders and regulations from going into force. And we on the Oversight Committee and on the House Judiciary Committee are watching this extremely closely, and that the administration is acting out in very vindictive and injurious ways within the immigration process. And we are watching that, and we are intervening wherever we can to stop that kind of malign use of power on his way out. Finally, it's been suggested that President Trump has faith in our elections process and in the Constitution. All I can say about that is you are right. It is scandalous, it's atrocious that a president of the United States would behave in this way to bring disgrace to our country in the eyes of the world, to undermine people's confidence in the peaceful transfer of power. And, again, we will do everything that we can to prevent this. Many members of the administration who have left the administration have talked about the 25th Amendment. Amendment does exist for situations like this. It says that the vice president and a majority of the cabinet, or the vice president and a majority of a body set up by Congress, can act in the event that the president is unable to execute the powers and duties of office. One of the duties of office is to oversee a peaceful transfer of power when it is the president's turn to leave and to turn over power to someone else. So if the vice president were to stand up and say that the president is acting dishonorably and lawlessly, and I know we have to imagine that, it's a hypothetical, but if he were, I know that Congress would be there to stand by the vice president to try to empower the vice president to take over the transition so we can have a meaningful and safe transition of power. If not, it's going to be very messy and it's going to be very bumpy, but we will make sure that the United States is vindicated. We will make sure that the popular vote, as it translates into an electoral college majority, is respected by the US government, and that the new president, President-elect Biden, and Vice President-elect Harris take their office on January 20th, 2021. We will see that that is going to happen. And that is my solemn pledge to you. I appreciate everybody's concern. We are operating, on the background of the president upsetting the rule of law and trampling constitutional boundaries on an almost daily basis for the last 4 years. So none of us can really say that we are surprised by this. We were ready for it, and we are ready for it, and we are going to defend this presidential election every step along the way. At the county level, at the state level, in the state capitals, we're going to defend it in the House of Representatives, we're going to defend it in the US Senate, we're going to defend it in the Electoral College. We're going to make sure that the winner of this election, who has won this election, takes office in 2021 on January 20th. We are going to make that happen. So thank you for all of these hundreds of emails and phone calls. I understand how concerned and anxious everybody is. Nothing is more important to me during this period other than the health of my constituents. And remember, we are also dealing with the nightmare of COVID-19, which has spun out of control under the lethal recklessness of this president. So we also need to please pay close attention to the public health, social distancing, and masking during this process. But we're going to defend the people, we're going to defend our public health, and we're going to defend our democracy. Thank you for tuning in, and I will be in touch.